Yeah, so in order to really understand the world in which he was born into, I want to go back a bit and describe what had happened to China in the last sort of, in the 19th century, because it all matters. It certainly matters once Mao himself becomes involved in political life. You sort of need to know what had happened. So I could pick up the story probably from the first Opium War, which kicks off in 1839. Famously, China for, thousands of years had been quite closed off. But all throughout the 18th and early 19th century, a lot of the developed powers of the West, mainly Britain, but also, France and Germany, were interested in trade. They'd got to that part of the world and it was a huge market just ready to be tapped. It was unthinkable, really, to the Western mind that you wouldn't try and exploit trade routes into China. It's like an endless market, really.
And they still have had a vast population even at that time.
Yeah, I think even in the mid-19th century, they had a population of like 400 million, I think, in that ballpark. So it's huge. Right. So Britain was trading, among other things, silk tea. Silk and tea were the big ones, and porcelain. Silk tea and porcelain were like the big three, but was trading anything and everything, really.
Trading those things.
We was buying that off of the Chinese, right. Yeah, and paying for it in gold and silver. But the markets were just so huge that paying for everything in gold and silver just wasn't going to be sustainable. So someone came up with the brainwave to start paying for everything with opium, just trading opium for the things we wanted. And as we controlled India, and India grew a lot of opium, huge amounts of opium, we would just ship the opium from India across to China, Canton in the south there, and trade it for all the great goods that would be really expensive when we sold them back in Europe. But the amount of opium that was flooding into China was kind of destroying Chinese society. There were opium dens everywhere, and sort of opium addiction was endemic. So the Manchu emperors decided to try and crack down on it, and one of the other things they hated was the Christian missionaries. A lot of the Westerners or Europeans brought a lot of Christian missionaries to China. They made the argument that China is undeveloped and backward because they're not Christian. Right. But, I mean, those arguments are pretty much debunked these days, aren't they? I mean...
Yeah. They think of Christendom as the same as Enlightenment and
they thought of like, in a way, they sort of equated industrialisation, I suppose, in a way, with, or just the development of human civilization with being a Christian.
And some people still make that argument now.
Yeah. So anyway, the Chinese authorities by 1839 had enough, and they blew up a British ship full of opium in the bay there. That pissed off Westminster, no end. So I don't want to go into it too much. I'm only really setting the picture for Mao, but there was the first Opium War that lasted 3 or 4 years where we won because we had modern artillery and guns and gunships versus like Chinese junks. There was no contest. And so at the end of that, in 1842, I think, the Chinese had to sign what was to them a humiliating treaty. It was called HMS Cornwallis, I believe. So, really humiliating. And the British just said, we're able to trade opium as much as we like, thanks. And Hong Kong will be ours, like we'll literally, they called them like concession ports or something.
Right, yeah.
Where you had your actual, the law of Britain was there, like an embassy, I suppose. But it was the whole city where Chinese, indigenous native Chinese people lived there still, and they were under the rule of Britain. But then it wasn't just Britain, it was also, everyone was getting involved. The French, the Germans.
The railway concessions as well, later maybe.
Yeah, later, a bit later. After the first Opium War, after the second Opium War, which I'll get onto, there was reformists and starting with railways and newspapers and all that good stuff. But at this point, the Russians, the Americans, the Japanese, everyone was just sort of trying to take a piece of China and its market and making concession ports all the way down that whole eastern coast of China, which is, huge. All the powers had their own little bit.
Right.
But Britain were sort of the main boys out there, the main faces, the most powerful ones anyway. British Empire was at its height, really, at its zenith. So, yeah, we ruled the oceans. No one's navy was comparable to the British Navy in the middle of the 19th century, yeah. And things simmered, and then there was I don't want to go into too much detail, but then there was a second Opium War where, again, the Chinese people and authorities tried to kick back, essentially, against Western control and the missionaries and the opium and the whole thing. And again, the Western powers just kicked their ass militarily. Not much of a contest, really. Actual rifles, like a Martini rifle versus nothing. It's not a contest.
Crossbows.
You had actual by the end of the Second Opium War, 1860, they had proper cannons, repeating rifles and stuff.
Right.
So
Devastating.
yeah. I mean, the American Civil War was happening at this point, but, to put it in some context.